What do you do when life hands you loss, loneliness, and acres of land no one can share? For Ethan Carter, the answer came in an unexpected letter, a chance at love, or perhaps another heartbreak. The aroma of fresh hay filled the small ranch on Main Street. Ethan stood behind the fence, mending a broken post with steady hands, his mind heavy with memories. 3 years ago, his beloved wife, Emily, had passed away, leaving him alone to manage their dream, the ranch they had built together. Every day, he watched couples walk by, laughing and holding hands while he tended to livestock and crops. He smiled politely, hiding the ache in his chest. But tonight, as he cleaned his tools and locked the gate, something felt different. A letter sat on the table, its edges crisp and promising. It was time to take a risk. Ethan's first suitor arrived with promises of grandeur, her presence commanding attention from the moment she stepped off the train. Vanessa was a vision of beauty, tall, poised, and radiating confidence. She carried herself with an air of elegance, as though she were accustomed to being admired by all who crossed her path. Dressed in a flowing silk dress that shimmered under the sunlight, her jewelry catching every glint of light, she looked like someone plucked straight out of a storybook. The townsfolk couldn't help but whisper among themselves about how fortunate Ethan was, a humble rancher catching the eye of such a striking and sophisticated woman. To them, it seemed like fate had smiled upon him. But beneath her dazzling exterior, Vanessa's true intentions soon surfaced. On her very first visit to the ranch, the heart of Ethan's life and livelihood, she inspected the space with thinly veiled disdain. Her nose wrinkled at the dust-covered fences, her lips pursed at the modest barns filled with livestock and tools. "Why do you waste your time here?" she asked, her tone sharp and dismissive. "This place could be sold for a fortune, Ethan. You could be so much richer than this." Her words hung heavy in the air, laced with greed and reproach. It wasn't just criticism. It felt like a rejection of his entire existence, as if the ranch and Ethan himself were beneath her ambitions. As days turned into weeks, Vanessa's restlessness grew. She made no effort to hide her dissatisfaction with the quiet little town or Ethan's simple way of life. Her eyes gleamed with dreams of wealth, and she spoke often of selling the ranch to fund a lavish life in the city. During dinner one evening, she placed her fork down with deliberate force and declared, "This ranch is a burden. Sell it, and we could live like kings." Her voice was firm, leaving no room for discussion, as if Ethan's dreams were irrelevant. Those words cut deep, revealing the truth Ethan had begun to suspect. Vanessa wasn't there for love or partnership. She saw the ranch as a means to wealth and status, and Ethan as a stepping stone to her grandiose future. When it became clear that Ethan would not abandon his ranch for her schemes, her interest waned. One chilly evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Vanessa packed her belongings without so much as a word. Ethan found her in the guest room, folding dresses into a suitcase with brisk efficiency. When he tried to speak, she silenced him with a cold glance. "This place isn't worth my time," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I deserve better." Moments later, she walked out the door, her heels clicking against the wooden floorboards before fading into silence. Ethan followed her to the doorway, watching as she climbed into a waiting cab. He stood there long after the vehicle disappeared into the horizon, the dust settling behind it. The house felt emptier than ever, the absence of her presence amplified by the weight of unspoken words and shattered hopes. The silence that enveloped him was deafening, pressing against his chest like a physical force. In that stillness, Ethan realized two things. Vanessa had never truly cared for him, and her greed had driven her away before any bond could form. Not long after Vanessa's abrupt departure, another letter arrived in the mail. This one bore a different tone altogether, practical, direct, and brimming with ambition. It was from Lauren, a woman who introduced herself as someone eager to build a future rooted in success and progress. Unlike Vanessa, whose allure had been wrapped in glamour and superficial charm, Lauren exuded an air of determination. Her words were calculated, her sentences precise, painting a picture of grand possibilities for Ethan's modest ranch. She envisioned turning it into something far greater, a chain of ranches stretching across the state, each location carrying the same name but operating on a much larger scale. At first, her ideas seemed thrilling, even intoxicating. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to dream alongside her, imagining what it might feel like to see his family traditions shared with countless people beyond the confines of their small town. But as the days passed, Lauren's true motives began to show. Beneath her ambitious plans lay a stark lack of connection, not just to Ethan, but to the essence of what made the ranch special. To Lauren, the ranch wasn't a labor of love or a cornerstone of the community. It was merely a business opportunity, a way to amass wealth. She spoke often about profits and expansion strategies, rarely pausing to acknowledge the joy that ranching brought to Ethan's life or to the lives of those who frequented his land. Neighbors weren't individuals to her. They were numbers, potential revenue streams waiting to be maximized. The warmth and care that defined Ethan's approach to his craft seemed lost on her entirely. One evening, tensions boiled over during a heated argument. Lauren paced the room, her voice sharp and unyielding, as she criticized every aspect of Ethan's attachment to the ranch. "You'll never grow if you cling to this tiny plot," she snapped, her words cutting through the air like shards of glass. "This place is holding you back. You're stuck in the past, Ethan. Don't you want more?" Her accusations stung not because they were entirely false, but because they missed the point entirely. Yes, Ethan valued growth and improvement, but not at the expense of everything that mattered most to him. His ranch wasn't just a business. It was a part of him, intertwined with memories, traditions, and the relationships he'd built over years of hard work. Lauren's vision, driven by her hunger for profit, left no room for any of that. When Ethan stood firm, refusing to transform the ranch into her commercial empire, Lauren's patience snapped. "I didn't come here to waste my time on a small-time rancher," she declared, grabbing her coat. "I'm meant for bigger things." Without waiting for a response, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, reverberating in Ethan's chest like a hollow ache. He stood frozen for a moment, staring at the empty doorway where she had stood moments before. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the weight of yet another failed attempt at companionship. As he looked around the quiet kitchen, now dimly lit by the soft glow of the overhead lamp, Ethan couldn't help but reflect on how fleeting hope could be. Lauren's arrival had briefly reignited a spark within him, a belief that perhaps this time would be different. But her greed and ambition had driven her away, just as Vanessa's had. Ethan sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair as fatigue settled over him. He glanced at the fence where he had spent countless hours mending posts, tending livestock, and perfecting his work. It struck him then, Lauren, like Vanessa before her, hadn't truly understood what the ranch meant to him. And perhaps, he realized with a pang of sadness, he hadn't fully understood them either. Both women had entered his life with their own dreams and desires, none of which aligned with his own. As the night stretched on, Ethan sat alone in the quiet, wondering if he would ever find someone who could see the beauty in his simple, fulfilling life and choose to share it with him. Weeks later, Ethan received a third letter. This one arrived unexpectedly, its simplicity standing in stark contrast to the previous correspondences he'd read. There were no sweeping promises of grandeur, no bold declarations of ambition or wealth. Just a few lines written in neat, careful handwriting. The message was brief, almost hesitant. Hannah Moore. Saturday, 10 a.m. That was all. No elaborate descriptions, no attempts to impress. just a name and a time, as if Hannah trusted that her presence alone would speak louder than words. On the appointed morning, Ethan stood at the railway station, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat. He watched as passengers disembarked from the train, searching for a face that matched the image in his mind. Then he saw her, Hannah. She stepped down from the train with none of the dramatic flair Vanessa had once exuded, nor the commanding confidence Lauren had carried. Instead, she moved quietly, almost unassumingly, her petite frame wrapped in a modest cotton dress that bore little resemblance to the silk finery of Ethan's first suitor. In one hand, she clutched a small, worn suitcase. In the other, she held a book, its pages slightly dog-eared. Her hair was pulled back into a simple braid, and though her eyes betrayed a hint of fatigue, they also held something else, a quiet strength, an unspoken resilience that seemed to anchor her despite whatever challenges life had thrown her way. When Hannah finally met Ethan's gaze, she offered a shy smile, her lips curving upward just enough to soften the nervousness etched across her features. As they exchanged greetings, Ethan noticed her stutter, a subtle but noticeable hesitation in her speech. It wasn't pronounced enough to disrupt conversation, but it was there, lingering beneath each word. He knew instinctively that this trait had likely caused others to overlook her in the past, dismissing her as too timid or unworthy of their attention. But Ethan found himself drawn not to what might have repelled others, but to what lay beneath. The sincerity in her voice, the kindness in her expression, and the unmistakable purity of her heart. As they shook hands, a strange sensation washed over Ethan, a calmness he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the kind of excitement that came with grand plans or lofty expectations. Rather, it was something quieter, more profound, a sense of peace as though some invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time since beginning this journey of matrimonial correspondence, Ethan didn't feel the need to measure up, to prove himself worthy of someone else's approval. With Hannah, there was no pretense, no pressure to conform to someone else's vision of success or happiness. She simply was authentic, genuine, and unapologetically herself. In the days that followed, Hannah revealed even more of her character through her actions and questions. Unlike Vanessa, who had dismissed the ranch as beneath her, or Lauren, who had seen it merely as a stepping stone to wealth, Hannah showed a genuine interest in the soul of the place. She didn't ask about profits or expansion strategies. Instead, she asked about the traditions, the stories behind each herd of livestock, each crop. "Where did you learn to manage these?" she inquired one afternoon, her fingers tracing the edge of a freshly mended fence. "Who taught you?" Ethan found himself sharing memories he hadn't spoken of in years, stories of his late mother, Emily, who had instilled in him a love for ranching and dreams they had shared for the ranch before her passing. As he spoke, Hannah listened intently, her eyes never straying from his face. She nodded occasionally, asking thoughtful follow-up questions that showed she truly cared about the answers. For the first time, Ethan felt seen, not just as the rancher behind the fence, but as the man behind the work. Someone understood him, not for what he could offer materially, but for who he was at his core. Still, doubts lingered in the back of Ethan's mind. Could someone so seemingly fragile handle the challenges of running a ranch? Or would she, like Vanessa and Lauren, leave when things got tough? The work was grueling, requiring early mornings, long hours, and an endless capacity for patience. Ranching wasn't just a job. It was a lifestyle, one that demanded resilience and dedication. Would Hannah be able to keep up? And if she couldn't, would she abandon him as the others had? The uncertainty gnawed at him, though he tried to push it aside. Each day, Hannah proved herself in small but meaningful ways. She rolled up her sleeves without complaint, learning the intricacies of mending fences, tending livestock, and planting crops. Neighbors soon grew fond of her warm smile and gentle demeanor, often remarking on how seamlessly she seemed to fit into the rhythm of the ranch. Yet, Ethan couldn't shake the fear that this newfound harmony might be fleeting. What if Hannah decided the life of a rancher's wife was too much for her? What if the pressures of the ranch became overwhelming? These thoughts haunted him, even as he marveled at her growing competence and grace. Despite his lingering doubts, there were moments when Ethan allowed himself to hope. One evening, as they cleaned up after finishing chores, Hannah pulled out a harmonica from her coat pocket. Ethan raised an eyebrow in surprise. He hadn't known she played music. Without saying a word, she brought the instrument to her lips and began to play. The mournful tune that followed seemed to echo the loneliness they both carried, weaving together fragments of sorrow and longing into a melody that filled the quiet barn. For the first time, Ethan realized he wasn't the only one fighting invisible battles. Hannah's hesitations, her stutter, her quiet reserve, they weren't signs of weakness, as others might have assumed, but evidence of a life lived with courage despite hardship. In that moment, he saw her not as someone fragile, but as someone strong, someone who had endured and persevered in ways he was only beginning to understand. Yet, even as trust began to blossom between them, Ethan couldn't fully silence the voice of doubt whispering in the back of his mind. Life had taught him that happiness was often precarious, easily shattered by circumstances beyond his control. Would Hannah stay when the going got tough? Or would she, like those before her, walk away when the realities of his world proved too daunting? Only time would tell. Days turned into weeks, and Hannah stayed. Unlike Vanessa, who had criticized every aspect of the ranch, or Lauren, who had demanded change at every turn, Hannah worked quietly and diligently. She rolled up her sleeves without complaint, learning the intricacies of mending fences, tending livestock, and planting crops. Each task, no matter how small, was approached with care and precision. Whether it was cleaning up after chores, helping an elderly neighbor carry a heavy sack of feed to their wagon, or suggesting creative ideas for seasonal plantings, she contributed in ways that went beyond mere duty. Her presence brought a new energy to the ranch, not flashy or disruptive, but steady and grounding. Neighbors soon grew fond of her warm smile and gentle demeanor, often remarking on how seamlessly she seemed to fit into the rhythm of the ranch. Every small act Hannah performed felt like a brick laid in the foundation of something new. Ethan began to notice the subtle ways she transformed not just the ranch, but his life as well. She remembered the names of regular visitors, greeted them warmly, and even anticipated their needs. When Mr. Hargrove came in grumbling about his usual hay delivery being slightly delayed one morning, Hannah surprised him with a free sack of oats instead. "Thought you might appreciate something extra today," she said softly, her stutter barely noticeable. By the end of the week, Mr. Hargrove was asking specifically for the oat surprise whenever he visited. These moments added up, creating a tapestry of connection and trust that neither Ethan nor Hannah could have predicted when they first met. One evening, as they cleaned up after finishing chores, Hannah pulled out a harmonica from her coat pocket. Ethan raised an eyebrow in surprise. He hadn't known she played music. Without saying a word, she brought the instrument to her lips and began to play. The mournful tune that followed seemed to echo the loneliness they both carried, weaving together fragments of sorrow and longing into a melody that filled the quiet barn. For the first time, Ethan realized he wasn't the only one fighting invisible battles. Hannah's hesitations, her stutter, her quiet reserve, they weren't signs of weakness, as others might have assumed, but evidence of a life lived with courage despite hardship. In that moment, he saw her not as someone fragile, but as someone strong, someone who had endured and persevered in ways he was only beginning to understand. But just as trust began to grow, disaster struck. It happened late one night, when the town was cloaked in darkness and silence. An electrical fault in the aging wiring sparked a fire in the barn, spreading quickly through the dry wood and flammable materials stored there. Flames licked hungrily at the walls, consuming everything in their path. Half the equipment was destroyed, leaving the ranch in ruins. Smoke billowed out into the fields, choking the air and drawing panicked neighbors from their homes. Firefighters arrived swiftly, working tirelessly to contain the blaze, but by the time the flames were extinguished, the damage was devastating. The next morning, Ethan stood amidst the charred remains of what had once been his pride and joy. The tools were warped and useless. The fences melted beyond recognition. Ash coated every surface, and the acrid smell of smoke clung to the air, making it hard to breathe. Panic gripped the town as rumors spread. Would Ethan lose everything he had worked for? Could the ranch survive such a catastrophic loss? For Ethan, the destruction felt personal, a betrayal not just of his livelihood, but of the dreams he had nurtured for so many years. He thought of his mother, Emily, whose methods lined the pages of his old notebook, now reduced to ash. He thought of all the hours spent perfecting each task, each effort, pouring his heart into every creation. And he thought of Hannah, whose quiet dedication had breathed new life into the ranch. As the weight of the situation pressed down on him, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, would Hannah stand by him when it mattered most? Or would this tragedy reveal yet another layer of impermanence in his life? He glanced at her as she stood beside him, surveying the wreckage with wide, tear-filled eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, but she reached out and placed one gently on his arm. "We'll fix this," she whispered, her voice firm despite the quiver in her tone. Together. For a moment, Ethan let himself believe her. But doubt lingered in the corners of his mind, whispering insidious questions. Hadn't Vanessa walked away when faced with the reality of his humble life? Hadn't Lauren stormed out when her ambitions clashed with his values? What made Hannah any different? Was it possible for someone to truly stay when the road ahead looked so uncertain? Hannah must have sensed his hesitation because she stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Ethan," she said, her stutter momentarily absent, "I didn't come here looking for perfection. I came here looking for home. This place, it's more than just a ranch. It's part of you. And if you'll let me, I want to help rebuild it. Not because I have to, but because I want to." Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound, cutting through the haze of despair that had clouded his thoughts. In that moment, Ethan realized that Hannah wasn't just offering to help rebuild a business. She was offering to build a future. One brick at a time, one shared struggle at a time. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan allowed himself to hope. Not the fleeting, fragile kind that burned brightly and then fizzled out, but a steadier, more enduring sort. Perhaps, he thought, love wasn't about finding someone who promised perfection. Maybe it was about finding someone who chose to stay, even when the world threatened to fall apart. Together, Ethan and Hannah fought to save what remained of the ranch, their determination unwavering despite the enormity of the task before them. In the days following the fire, they worked tirelessly, salvaging whatever tools had survived the blaze and carefully sorting through the debris to recover anything of value. The once familiar scent of fresh hay and crops was replaced by the acrid tang of smoke, but neither of them allowed themselves to dwell on the loss for too long. Instead, they focused on rebuilding, one small step at a time. Ethan took charge of repairing the damaged tools, his hands calloused from years of mending fences, now blistered from hours spent scraping away charred metal and soot. Hannah, meanwhile, organized the supplies that had been spared, meticulously cataloging sacks of feed, seeds, and tools as though ensuring no detail would go overlooked. Her quiet efficiency became a source of comfort to Ethan, who found himself leaning on her strength more than he cared to admit. There were moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them both, when the weight of the destruction seemed insurmountable. But they pressed on, buoyed by an unspoken understanding that this was not just about saving a business. It was about preserving something far greater. Miraculously, within days, they managed to reopen the ranch. It wasn't perfect. The fences were makeshift, patched together with wood and wire scavenged from nearby farms, and the operations were limited to a few staples they could reliably manage with their reduced resources. But it was enough. Word spread quickly through the town that the ranch was back in operation, and neighbors began streaming in, eager to show their support. Some brought sacks of feed or bundles of hay to share, while others simply offered words of encouragement. The outpouring of kindness touched Ethan deeply, reminding him of the tight-knit community he cherished. Yet, it was Hannah's steadfast presence that truly kept him grounded during those chaotic days. Despite the grueling hours and the emotional toll of the fire, she never wavered. She greeted each neighbor with her characteristic warmth, her smile never faltering even when fatigue shadowed her eyes. Late at night, after the last visitor had left and the ranch was finally quiet, they would sit together amidst the charred remains of the barn, sipping cups of tea brewed from salvaged leaves. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken bond they had forged through shared hardship. One such evening, as the moonlight filtered softly through the cracked window panes, Hannah turned to Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her words steady and resolute despite the tremor in her tone. Those simple words carried more weight than any grand declaration ever could. They weren't just a promise. They were a vow, spoken with a sincerity that left no room for doubt. For Ethan, they ignited something deep within him, a spark of hope he thought had died long ago. It was a feeling he hadn't dared to embrace since the early days of his journey, before Vanessa's departure and Lauren's disillusionment had hardened his heart. But here, in this moment, surrounded by the ruins of his life's work, he allowed himself to believe again. Slowly but surely, the ranch began to thrive once more, thanks to their combined efforts. Neighbors returned not only for the essential supplies, but also for the palpable sense of warmth and resilience radiating from the couple. Townsfolk remarked on how Ethan and Hannah seemed to complement each other perfectly. His steady craftsmanship balanced by her creative flair, his quiet stoicism softened by her gentle optimism. Together, they transformed the ranch into something stronger than it had been before, infusing it with a renewed spirit that reflected their own journey of perseverance and trust. As weeks turned into months, the scars of the fire became less visible, both in the ranch and in Ethan's heart. New tools replaced the old, brighter paint covered the soot-stained walls, and the aroma of fresh hay once again filled the air. Yet, the most profound change was the one that unfolded between Ethan and Hannah. What had begun as a tentative partnership blossomed into something deeper, a shared commitment to building a life rooted in love, resilience, and mutual respect. In the quiet moments, when the bustle of the day gave way to stillness, Ethan often found himself watching Hannah as she worked. He marveled at her ability to find beauty in imperfection, whether it was in the slightly uneven line of a repaired fence or the weathered cracks in the wooden posts. And he realized that, like the ranch itself, their relationship was being rebuilt, not to erase the past, but to honor it. Every crack, every scar told a story of survival, of two people choosing to stand side by side, even when the world around them felt uncertain. For the first time in years, Ethan felt whole. The ranch was no longer just a place where he worked. It was a home, a testament to the power of second chances and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And as he looked at Hannah, her hands dusted with dirt and her eyes alight with purpose, he knew without a shadow of a doubt that she was exactly where she belonged, just as he was. Months later, the town gathered to celebrate the ranch's revival, a joyous occasion that had been weeks in the making. The fields were alive with music, laughter, and the sweet aroma of fresh hay wafting through the crisp evening air. Strings of lanterns hung between posts, casting a warm golden glow over the crowd. Children darted between tables laden with crops and supplies, while adults mingled, raising glasses in toast to the couple who had brought new life to the heart of their community. For Ethan, the scene was almost surreal. It wasn't just the festivities or the outpouring of support from the townsfolk that overwhelmed him. It was the realization that he finally felt truly alive again. The weight of loneliness that had settled over him for so long had lifted, replaced by a sense of belonging he hadn't known he'd been missing. As the band struck up a lively tune, Hannah appeared at his side, her cheeks flushed from the excitement of the evening. She looked radiant in a simple dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon that matched the cheerful decorations strung across the field. With a shy smile, she held out her hand, her voice soft but steady. "May I have this dance?" she asked, her eyes meeting his with a quiet confidence that made his heart skip a beat. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before taking her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers as they intertwined with his own. Their first steps on the makeshift dance floor were awkward. Ethan stumbled slightly and used the rhythm of the music, while Hannah laughed softly, her stutter momentarily forgotten as she teased him good-naturedly. But soon, something remarkable happened. They found their groove. Their movements became fluid, synchronized not because they were perfect dancers, but because they moved together, each step guided by an unspoken understanding. The world around them seemed to fade. The chatter of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, even the twinkling lights overhead, all of it receded until it was just the two of them, swaying under the starlit sky. In that moment, surrounded by music and joy, Ethan leaned in and kissed her, a quiet, tender gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it carried within it a promise deeper than words could convey. A promise to stand by her, no matter what challenges lay ahead. A promise to cherish not just the highs, but also the lows, the struggles, the setbacks, the moments when life tested them most. As their lips met, the noise of the celebration returned, louder and more vibrant than before, yet neither of them noticed. They were lost in their own little world, one built on trust, resilience, and love. The ranch, once a symbol of loss and heartbreak, had transformed into something entirely different, a testament to second chances and the power of perseverance. Every crack in the fences, every scorch mark hidden beneath fresh paint, told a story of survival. It was a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal, given time, effort, and unwavering determination. More than that, it stood as a monument to the bond Ethan and Hannah had forged, a bond strengthened by shared hardship and mutual respect. As the night wore on and the stars grew brighter above them, Ethan found himself reflecting on how far they had come. He thought back to the day Hannah had stepped off the train, her suitcase in hand and uncertainty in her gaze. He remembered the fire that had nearly destroyed everything he held dear, and the fear that had gripped him in its aftermath. Yet here they were, standing stronger than ever, not because they had avoided adversity, but because they had faced it head-on, together. Whatever storms lay ahead, and Ethan knew there would inevitably be more, they would weather them as a team. After all, they had already learned the secret to surviving anything, staying side by side, no matter what. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to dream, not cautiously, as he had done in the past, but with full-hearted optimism. He imagined a future filled with late-night conversations over cups of tea, lazy mornings spent mending fences together, and countless celebrations like this one, where the entire town came together to share in their happiness. And as he gazed at Hannah, her face glowing with contentment and love, he realized that she wasn't just his partner in running the ranch. She was his partner in life, an equal, a confidant, and, most importantly, someone who saw him for exactly who he was and chose to stay anyway. Under the canopy of stars, Ethan whispered a silent thank you for the fire that had forced him to confront his fears, for the people who had rallied around them, and for Hannah, whose quiet strength had taught him that true love wasn't about finding perfection. It was about embracing imperfection, about choosing to rebuild even when a road ahead seemed uncertain. Together, they had turned ashes into hope, ruin into renewal, and loss into love. And as the music played on and the laughter echoed through the night, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning of their story.